Good morning. Welcome to the broadcast. You are watching New Day KE with Victor Marende and Fred Asira about to take their accounts. But first, at least 25 youth groups have joined the push to have public officials who oversaw the loot at the Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, KEMSA, creating an overnight millionaires, swiftly investigated and prosecuted. The groups also want President Uhuru Kenyatta to address the nation on allegations of corruption at KEMSA and in county government, where there seems to be a concern that is putting at stake billions of shillings in donor fund meant to contain the pandemic. Here's that update.
The demand for accountability in the use of billions of shillings allocated for the COVID-19 interventions continues to gather momentum, with youth groups, which comprise of civil societies and non-governmental organizations, calling upon the relevant institutions to take action.
It is very sad indeed to note that there are people who are becoming rich amidst a pandemic that is making young people poor, that is making young people resort to crime.
Next, we shall come for you in the offices because we are tired of you. We are being paid on our taxpayers' money. Youth have no employment, have no jobs. As you are seated here, we are here to address the press because we don't have jobs.
They want the government to provide full closure and accountability for all COVID-19 funds from all sources, including loan grants, donations, in-kind support both locally and internationally.
But as young people and as Kenyans, we demand that we want to see accountability from the side of the government to this accountability of these funds.
The lobbyists also complain that the current loopholes have led to the overpricing of commodities, purchase of substandard PPEs, embezzlement of commodities including donated PPEs, failure of the PPEs to reach those who need it the most, including healthcare workers on the front line fighting COVID-19. This comes at a time when the opposition party, the Orange Democratic Movement, is on the receiving end for issuing a statement that appeared to be defending those suspected of stealing COVID-19 funds and dismissing reports that money had been stolen at KEMSA.
You owe us accountability. You owe us respect for our taxpayers' money. You owe us the resilience that you showed when you came to us to look for votes. So please, we put you there to represent us, not to represent your own interest. And for that, as young people of this nation, we are watching you.
However, responding to the backlash, ODM leader Raila Odinga defended his party position on the alleged theft of COVID-19 billions, saying his call for a forensic audit was not a defense of the suspects. In a statement, Odinga said a special audit of COVID-19 funds was the only way for Kenyans to know the whole truth. Busara Naman for Ebru TV.
Now we take the account of Victor Marende, who is an anthropologist, commentator on political social development. Victor, good morning. Your time is appreciated. And Fred Asira commentates on social political development and anti-corruption crusader. Gentlemen, before I take your accounts into what's happening, the concern from the medical end and how it can impact the healthcare system and the political note and the connotation to it. And before we do that, let's have the Daily Nation front page. This is coming up on your screens. The ODM party leader Raila Odinga takes the hit on the COVID-19 scandal, and if we can have this pulled up, you have Mr. Odinga, who responded, though not the capture of this picture as it interprets. This was a past interview. He talked about his health, his view of the political development in the country when he jetted back from Dubai after undergoing a medical process. This story is equally highlighted on the front page of the Star newspaper, and we are having that up. Here we go, Hillary. There's it. Why Raila Odinga is under fire for the COVID-19 billions, still on the front page of the Star newspaper. And left of that is the last tab, that is the first page of the People Daily, equally highlighted. This is the pandemic's numbers and the mapping element of how some parts of the country were affected. The Standard newspaper.
Give us the island for the Standard also.
That's good recommendation nonetheless. Victor, good morning.
Good morning, Ayub.
Before we get to the statement issued by the ODM party leader and Deputy President William Ruto saying that he is now off the curve in this, not involved in any way, given what's happening at the moment, it will ultimately cost life, isn't it, if this continues?
You know, the trend at the health docket in this country borders genocide. Because we cannot be talking about people's livelihoods and lives, yet the same money allocated for the safety of these same lives is purportedly stolen. But that notwithstanding, we cannot just sit down and say the money has been stolen without thorough audit and to determine how much is lost, who stole the money, and how did it get lost. Because then in all this hulabaloo, if we don't get to a proper region where we thoroughly audit the particular organizations and state agencies, then we would end up having some sweet talk, which has always been the norm in this country. And when the real issues come, where the bone meets the meat, then we will not get to the bottom of the issues.
Okay, that, of course, call by the special audit called for by the ODM party leader, will be discussing that. Fred Asira, when you look at what's happening at KEMSA now, the agency that was allocated billions now seeking bailout from the same government of 5 billion Kenya shillings, and you have a president who is seeking a legacy, perhaps a smooth legacy as he exits power. It does pile pressure and supplements the mega multi-billion scandals that have dotted his tenure, isn't it?
Yes, it does. And it's unfortunate that we have to discuss issues of corruption when at a time when we are facing a pandemic. I have always known that Kenya is a corrupt country based on past events.
And we Kenyans are corrupt.
And we Kenyans are corrupt.
According to Transparency International.
But I never expected us to be discussing corruption when it comes to a special situation like a pandemic where lives are at stake. So it really sends a very wrong picture to the government of the day and the people who are involved. But even before we delve into the statement that was issued by the Right Honorable former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, I think what the Premier was saying is what we need to do. We need to establish the facts surrounding the theft, and the people who are involved should be arrested and monies recovered. We do not want to see the PR arrests of the Kamata Fridays. And on that, I stand with Raila's statement.
Okay, yes. And of course, many Kenyans did support this statement yesterday, which was perhaps a supplement to the previous statement issued by the Secretary Edwin Sifuna. But Victor, coming to you, we have seen this as a concern expressed by the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, who said this is an equivalent to genocide, that is stealing money meant for the pandemic, because the world is literally struggling to cope with the speed of the pandemic and the fast pace of the virus. Given what's happening, we have seen some precedents yesterday from the government in Somalia, very feeble and no working institutions after 30 years of civil war, but the court did sentence some Ministry of Health officials for theft of public money to 18 years in jail. I mean, how then do we need to work around the already existing framework of justice here and bring those who are culpable here, who have flouted the procurement rules to book, because this will not only cost life, but will eternally, it means that our healthcare system will never be established.
No, like any corruption case in this country, I would want to laud what the Somali government did, and even what is happening in South Africa. When Ramaphosa insisted that anyone who stole that money must be accountable. But then the situation in Kenya is so funny, because as we try to look for this money, politics tends to take center stage. So until we will dissociate politics from the fight against corruption in this country, I doubt if we would go far. So the first procedure is what is recommended by the ODM party. Let's do a thorough audit, devoid of politics. Let's forget that there is a member of the ODM party, there is a member of the Jubilee Alliance or party, and get deep into the matter, so that if there is any money that has been lost, let's recover it and let the thugs go to jail. But as long as we are going to speak about, I'm not in today because so and so is in, or I think someone should not be vindicated because he's a family member, then we are not going to go anywhere.
Okay, actually, I think when the Deputy President made a statement that he's safe,
that he's not involved in this.
He's not involved in this. It really sent a very wrong message out there that we cannot fight corruption without individualizing people. You see, such that if I am not going to be blamed, then it's okay. or I am happy. So what kind of leadership do we have in this country? As a deputy president, I think he should have come out clearly to call for probably an audit, or to find out who are the persons behind this heinous act, so that things can work. But if you sit back as a deputy president that I was not involved, I don't care, something like that, it sounds very wrong.
But then, Victor, it opens up the lead on the next battlefront, isn't it? When you look at the counties now, on one end, number one is struggling because of cash crunch and the Senate deadlocked over the revenue stalemate, and you have no funds from the national government by the donors from the European Union, the IMF, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, all now, which cannot be accounted for. It clearly isn't it, with now the ministry saying that in 4 weeks' time we'll flatten the curve. In the event we have a resurge in the pandemic's curve or the cases of the virus, it means then that, isn't it, it will send us back to the drawing board and the zero-sum rate, ground zero, where we are again going to be struggling to cope with the virus.
You know, I hate a situation where the counties want to make it as if the government does not give them money, then they cannot operate. Because apart from being dependent on the national government, these county governments should be independent. And the separation of powers is very clear in the Constitution. So I like a situation where I would see a county like Homa Bay having a resource mobilization committee and a COVID-19 mobilization fund committee that was geared towards looking at everything. The other day I saw Professor Anyang' Nyong'o and the COG chairman doing a Lake Basin committee. It makes more sense than trying to over-rely on the national government to give you money, while we very well know that even if the monies were allocated and given rightly, they would not be enough. What we require is more than what is provided. So I would want to see these counties also turning out to be autonomous at times, to be making decisions on their own. And that is where Governor Joho beat all these governors in the fight against COVID-19. You realize that he did proper resource mobilization. He called on his friends to donate ventilators and good hospital facilities that then in turn ensured that they had enough beds. So these county governments should not be trying to tell us that the national government is doing this and we cannot do this because health is a devolved function. So it means they can rightly take decisions on their own on what to do about the health sector. That be made as it is, then the money is allocated for COVID-19 at the moment are with the Treasury. So even without the revenue sharing bill left aside, we have all these monies concentrated within the Treasury. And any county government at will have a right to seek the audience of Ukuri Attorney through the Council of Governors to ensure that they have an allocation when they have an emergency.
And therefore you agree with me that the counties at this time, despite falling short of the expectations when it comes to on-source revenue and having an autonomy in terms of their financial capability, they still need this fund or the funding to contain the pandemic, because the concern is at the counties at the moment.
It is needed.
Fred,
yes.
in coming to you then, when you look generally at what's happening across the counties, and you have President Uhuru Kenyatta, who wants, despite the pandemic coming to hit toll on the Kenyan economy, to leave, wanting to leave a legacy, but how then does it compound the already cloud of apprehension that Kenyans have and the resentment, public resentment in his management of the country, allegations of patronage, corruption, and mismanagement of the economy? How does he then turn this around and speak to the nation?
He has very limited choices because, firstly, it is perceived, or it has been alleged, that his family was deeply involved in the scam that has deprived Kenyans of the much-needed COVID-19 resources. So if he really wants to start afresh or on a clean slate, then he should champion the arrests of the people who are even perceived to be closer home to him. So unless he shows the way that, well, the people who have been mentioned, irrespective of their surnames, I am not going to interfere. I have championed for the investigations, and this is what has come out, and here are the culprits, and I'll not interfere. That's the only time that Kenyans can start listening to him. But if you have your ears on the ground, I don't think Kenyans are very upbeat with the leadership currently, especially because of the things that are happening, and the president is not taking firm actions. So he has very little he can do unless he jettisons his family.
Okay, then Victor, it brings me again to the other important aspect of this being a devolved function, but you see largely some of the functions remain with the national government, with more than 50 billion that is budgeted for the national operations of the healthcare provisions by the national government. And this happening, you have the 2015-16 financial year report by the Auditor General where 5 billion Kenya shillings were looted from the coffers of the Ministry of Health. So it's not the first time. But when Mutahi Kagwe looks back at the previous account of MAfya House, despite the current problems, how does he connect and perhaps come up with a chain of understanding and make the Kenyan people determine that there will be a successful conclusion into this matter in terms of accountability?
The matter at the Ministry of Health is more than Mutahi Kagwe.
He's in charge right now.
He is in charge, but he is in charge courtesy of the president. So he's a gatekeeper. And I think the rot at the Ministry of Health lies with the president solely. And I would borrow from the past and what President Kibaki did when there were scandals, and partly what Moi did. Number one, if the president was serious on this, the Ministry of Health needs a judicial inquiry.
Which is independent?
Which is independent.
And immune.
Yes. We need a judicial commission to unearth every rot at the MAfya House, so that eventually we know what has been happening to the very end. So without that being done, I even doubt if the Auditor General would be able to unearth everything. Yes, it is recommended that the Auditor General should do an audit on what is happening at the Ministry of Health. But then there is a disconnect between the separate powers. You know there was an Auditor General, then it took a while. We don't know for what reasons for another one to be appointed while one was in acting capacity. So that gap might have been used wrongly by forces that are unknown. But then if we were to have an independent commission to delve deep into the issue at the MAfya House, we would be able to know what is happening. That is one.
But given that, Victor, as you move to point number 2 in your account and the presentation, we had the Auditor General's report in 2015-16 financial year, where he clearly stated that 500 million US dollars, about 5 billion Kenya shillings, were looted from the Ministry of Health coffers. I mean, that is enough for prosecution, isn't it, of the then Ministry of Health officials? We have never done that. So what is the believability index here that Mutahi Kagwe can be the messiah here in terms of bringing these people to book?
That is why I removed him from that equation, because I'm sure he cannot. Mutahi Kagwe is of too much talk. You remember he came even before this scandal, was saying how much he's going to clean MAfya House, and how everyone was holding him back when he wanted to give transfers. A guy who is in charge of you, today you are given a position. A junior officer would not refuse to go for a transfer. It means you have no impetus.
It just doesn't make sense,
yes,
isn't it?
and ability to be in that office. So I would not want to put my hopes on Mutahi Kagwe. And I would want this to rely solely with the president.
But he's not the jack of all trades, isn't it? We have independent...
Let him appoint an independent commission. That is one.
What is the probability that the commission's recommendations will be acted on in this
because of the Auditor General's recommendation?
You know, with the commission's recommendation, even if action is not taken today, someday a government of goodwill will come.
Eternity.
Yes.
Judicial processes are eternal.
Yes.
Okay.
And they are binding. A government will come someday that will do a proper audit on those files that have been put to catch dust, and people will be brought to book. That is one. 2, if the president has some goodwill in him, then I want to believe everyone should stay suspended from that ministry.
Okay.
Everyone, including the Minister of Health, because if his PS is involved, then it means he knows something that we don't know about this thing. So I believe that that ministry requires total overhaul, from the secretary to the sweeper to everyone.
Okay, and he did raise the concerns when he said that you'll find people meeting on the wee hours of the morning at MAfya House and not knowing what to do, and meeting even in the boardrooms where the minister is supposed to be discharging his duties.
That means that even the office assistant who opens that office is involved.
A whole catalogue of corrupt state officials. Yes, Fred.
MAfya House is a crime scene. And there's a day that during his many pressers, Mutahi Kagwe alluded to that.
He said that this building has its
yes,
fair share.
Yeah. So it would take an individual who has more powers than the CS to crack the whip, only if that individual has the intention or has the goodwill or believes in bringing sanity into that building. But as it stands, if you see the names that have been mentioned, time in, time out, every time a scandal erupts from that building, then you might want to know why nothing is happening.
Okay, the questions that continue to remain and dot the Minister of Health. Gentlemen, we now turn our attention to the political angle of what has been transpiring on the COVID-19 funding. And first to you, Victor, let me just quote the Deputy President William Ruto, who on his Twitter did say that he distanced himself from the theft of the COVID-19 billions and said, and I quote him, "At least for once, it won't be possible to be blamed, me to be blamed for what someone said started in Wuhan as a virus in China, landed in Italy, in Europe as a pandemic, and now in Kenya as a multi-billion shilling corruption enterprise. Wacha niendelee kama spectator." And loosely translates to "let me continue being the spectator." It's right. That is what he tweeted. That is the Deputy President, William Ruto. It's an interpretation, or my understanding is that that there were many other corruption scandals that I was part of, but I'm not part of this one.
You know, even apart from that, it shows someone who has lost hope in the government, which is very dangerous for the current setting. And before I just get into that, it shows Kenyans that the position of the Deputy President is a position of a spectator, that you have no role in government and your work is to sit back and watch. You know, that is not the kind of arrangement that we envisioned when the new constitution came in and we had the position of a Deputy President rather than a Vice President. So it clearly sets a deviation between what should the Deputy President do. And I think that is part of the efforts that have been done by the Jubilee administration since it came in 2013 to rubbish and nullify the position of the Deputy President, to make it as useless as they can think of it, which is wrong. Then to what the Deputy President is saying, that because he is not to be blamed, then now he can sit back and relax. He's part of the executive.
He's part of the government.
He's part of this
He
government.
sits in the National Security Committee.
Yeah. So when he is telling us that he is not to be blamed, then it means he is now cleaning up his hands. And metaphorically, he is now the biblical Pontius Pilate, who washed his hands and said, "I'm now not involved in this. You can now crucify whoever you want." It is wrong. A wrong has been done, and two wrongs does not make a wrong. We know he has been involved in previous scandals. Him being not involved in this does not qualify this to be a bigger scandal. And the Bible rightly puts it, there is no bigger sin and there is no smaller sin. And money has been lost, it should be recovered.
Okay, and it just doesn't, isn't it, bring about a cleansing process, because this is a government that he has been the Deputy President, where there were concerns raised on the NYS money fed to you, the Eurobond NYS Season 2, the Aurora Kemore Dams scandal, that report before the Parliamentary Committee, which is waiting to be acted upon. The minister was in charge at the time, now facing corruption scandal at the courts of law. And given what's happening at the moment, it loosely again translates, isn't it, to a government that he is deputy to that is corrupt morally.
Exactly. I want you to look at the demeanor of the Deputy President 2013, 2017. And then you look at him now. Then you interpret his demeanor with the tweet that he made. And you will realize that this is a gentleman who is clearly telling us that 2013, 2017, all the corruption cases I was deeply involved, and now that I'm being crucified, I am not in this new one. So instead of being the deputy president whom we know, who will come out clearly to tell us that this government, serikali yangu na Uhuru Kenyatta, is a serikali that cannot be involved in NYS, cannot be involved in Eurobond. Now he is actually rubber stamping all those scandals that have happened, but trying to detach himself from this one. And I like what my friend says here. The problem that we have is that the Jubilee administration has managed to kill even the office of a deputy president and made it, they have reduced it to an MCA level or something of the sort. Even MCAs are more powerful. They can hold a governor ransom. And that is wrong.
Is that why he says that watch and Niendelee come a spectator? Let me continue being the spectator.
Exactly. He has no role. Is it an admission? It's an admission. And it also
it is a very grave admission that he is not part of this government and that he is not involved.
Exactly. So it brings to the question that we have always been asking, what are the duties and responsibilities of a deputy president in accordance with the Constitution? Do we just have a person who is escorting another one towards the presidency, or do we have an individual who can hold a government to account where the president is going wrong for the benefit of Kenyans? And if not, then those are the changes we need when BBI starts, so that we ensure that a deputy president has the voice and does not become a spectator.
You know, apart from being a spectator, I liked the position of the vice president for about only two reasons. One is that the vice president in the former constitution was in charge of something, and something to the extent that all those vice presidents were almost foreign affairs ministers or home affairs ministers. So then they were involved in something. Two, they were in charge of government business in parliament. Now this time round, we have a deputy president who is not a member of parliament. One. Two.
So as the president.
So as the president. But the president has executive powers. This is a deputy president who is elected on a ticket with the president, but relies on donations of authorities and powers from the president. So at a point where they don't agree, then the president has no moral authority and the constitutional authority to sack him and appoint someone who will willingly do the work for Kenyans. Okay. That is one. Two, and that they can go at loggerheads without Kenyans seeing a way through. Because we are not even sure how we can remove the deputy president without the president. These guys are on a ticket. If we have to impeach one, what happens to the other one?
Okay. Now, Victor, also the other angle to it is that the statement issued by Mr. Sifuna, the ODM party secgen, who said that the media, I included, often goes on a sensationalist extravaganza with half-baked information obtained from shadowy sources, ending up creating more problems than solution. He says, suffice to say that all Kenyans of goodwill have found these allegations disturbing and thoroughly demoralizing at a time when we are losing more lives to the virus. To stay still with that, it created more or less what appeared to have been an echo chamber of concern that the ODM party stood for social democracy, and why then undermine the investigative expose done by one of the media stations in the country on the revealing and letting the lead off the billionaires who have advantaged as a result of the pandemic.
Now, on that particular paragraph, I'm fence sitting. I'm on a 50-50. 50-50 that I can defend that statement, and 50-50 that that statement was so alarmist. Alarmist in this sense. You know, if he cared to do research, he would realize that in journalism there are forensic journalists and are allowed to do thorough audits, and that is their job. And we should not be, as a party, seen to be muzzling their authority to do investigations. And we are well aware of cases that the media has prosecuted to the very end, and in the best way possible. And not even in this country alone. The Clinton case was prosecuted by CNN properly.
Watergate scandal.
Yes, was prosecuted by the media. Now, we are seeing the Trump case with the US. It is being prosecuted by the media in the US properly, and I'm sure they are going to prosecute it to the very end without even going to court. So Kenya is not an exception. The media must be allowed from time to time to do investigative journalism to the free end that they need to do it. However, if they are seen to be overstepping and seen to be alarmists, because we know that reports by media can tilt the thinking. And I would borrow the Swahili saying by Wala bin Wala that the media ni kama kioo ya jamii. So it reflects what we do. And whenever we reflect ourselves in those mirrors and we are told that I have a dot here, then I'll be very worried. So it worries Kenyans, and it boils the anger in Kenyans. But Sifuna presented an ODM that did not want Kenyans to be angry of the COVID billionaires, which to some extent was wrong. But then the media has also played a role in watering down investigations in this country. When we are headed left, they have always, from time to time, taken us to right. And I would also give an example. When we were investigating...
But not on this one, right?
Not on this one.
Okay.
On this...
On this, do you agree with him? Do you stand by the statement he made?
I've clearly disagreed with him.
Okay, good stand. I was just looking for your defense line, because you said, if I am to defend, well, I'll defend that. But you went on the alarmist part, where, of course, we agree that there are concerns that some media composition of the stories are in clear violation of the ethics in media.
That is why I said I would agree with that statement in 50-50. On this particular one,
okay.
This was a thorough investigative journalism. And I liked the work. That is why I took my time, looked for the guy. And what the media house did should be encouraged. But then, at times, the media also turned to be alarmists in some situations. But I have confidence that media can prosecute cases to the very end.
Okay, good stuff. Very well noted. Even the Fox News in the United States of America is a Trump mouthpiece and often ultra-nationalist. Yes, Fred?
I want to say that there are times and instances where issues come out from the media that are not correct, that are not factual. There are cases where the media picks a side, which is also allowed, but people need to know. So, in my opinion, the SG probably was speaking on that statement alone. From his perspective. Probably there is something that he might know that we don't, and I wouldn't say that is wrong. So if there is something that probably he knows that we don't, we will not hang him. Maybe he'll get an opportunity to tell us why he disagreed with the expose. So I am not one of those people who will want a muzzled media house. I mean, who will vouch for muzzling of the media, because there are so many things in this country that the media has helped us to fight. Having said that, and having watched the documentary that was done by one Dennis, I think it begs the question of how do we as a nation or the people of this country take advantage of people like that who go out of their way to help? Because you see, all this debate we are having emanated from that.
Necessitated by that.
Exactly.
You know, such kind of statement would turn us back to Moi days, where there was no freedom of press and Linjiru was left to run the show in media houses. And when you aired something that was against the president, he would boldly come into the media house to confiscate and even to tell you what you should air. We are not ready to go back to those days. We are past those bad days.
Agreed, especially when I'm a member of the Fourth Estate, and more or less what appears to be then today is happening in, for instance, North Korea, where train stations and everywhere in the public road, and I mean, loud, I mean, microphones are fitted so that people can only hear things about the regime, Kim Jong-un, and the Communist Party also in China.
Look at what happened in China. Yes. Media was raided.
And that is on eve of the new security laws that will be set to govern the autonomous region of Hong Kong, which is set to be handed over in 2047, not in 2020. And Xi Jinping is under pressure for that. Gentlemen, let's now turn our attention to what will happen on the 27th of August. We are under 48 hours to mark exactly 10 years since we promulgated the 2010 Constitution that Kenyans voted for. 68% said yes to the document, and the first government that was effected under the Constitution was in 2013 of the Uhuru government. March elections, of course, after they were given the mandate to rule the country. Now, 7 years since the president was elected, and half years for that matter. There are concerns as to its implementation, the background, the content, and what many are saying is mutilation of the Constitution. Coming to you, Victor Marende, on the clear separation of powers, we have the judiciary, we have the executive, we have the legislature. I mean, owing to what's happening, because we started this discussion yesterday, and seeing the judiciary, which is cash-strapped, more or less performing a devolved function because courts are across the country, is it in order by the current government to do what it's doing, especially piling exogenous pressure on an independent arm of the government, the judiciary?
Ayub, you know, the Constitution of 2010 has largely, according to me, been a success. On a ranking scale, I would give it a 60% success rate. But then, as you put it, at Katiba at 10, without narrowing down on the executive, we need to audit what have been the gains of the current Constitution, and what have been the failures of the current Constitution. Number one, this Constitution has lauded human rights in this country.
The Bill of Rights.
Yes. And that Kenyans, for the very first time, are allowed to vent whenever they want to. But then, the executive has from time to time tried to limit that freedom. That should also be called out. And the judiciary has performed exemplarily well in ensuring that the Bill of Rights are protected. But who unto the executive, who has also been hell-bent in disobeying court orders? So as we audit the success, let's look at the role, and you rightly put it, let's look at the role of the judiciary, as independent as it should be. Let's look at the executive, and let's look at the legislature. So the judiciary largely has tried to be as independent and has tried to be seen to be doing the right thing to Kenyans. But then, at some point, it has also been called out for a backlog of cases
and corruption
to the judges and to some of the lawyers. But then, this is encouraged by the executive. The executive that has only served its 2 terms under this new Constitution. And the unfortunate statement that was made by the president and his deputy, that they shall revisit the judiciary. Then it led to budget cuts. It has led to some judges, some 41 judges not being appointed by the president, notwithstanding that his role is only to appoint them. And a few other instances where the judiciary has also been shut down by the executive. Lately, we saw a drama at the Supreme Court where some woman alleged that he had a kid with the Chief Justice. So it has been a situation where we want to make the Chief Justice look very bad. Yet, in essence, it has been somewhere and someone trying to remote control the judiciary through the Chief Justice.
Okay, that isn't it. I mean, Victor, it's very important to have an independent judiciary. It's why democratic societies, civilized societies do thrive. I mean, Then that happening, and of course, when you mentioned the executive and wanted to micromanage the affairs of the judiciary, isn't it then perhaps a dark spot in the president's tenure, even as he now excited to leave office in 2022, which we're not sure of?
I would not say he's excited to leave because I've not seen the excitement. In fact,
all indications are that he wants to stay. Now, let me take you. Let me give you a brief history, Ayub, so that we move on to this. The Constitution 2010 that we promulgated was a culmination of several events that began somewhere in the early 90s.
It was in 97.
In the early 90s,
Constitutional Review Act.
so I'm bringing you, I'm giving you the history pole-pole.
So, feeding you pole-pole.
So when the clamor for change and democratic space started, and there were all those initiatives that were brought that culminated in the repealing of Section 2A, that allowed us to have a democracy. Then the clamor continued until somewhere in 97. You remember the minimal reforms, no elections, and all those kind of things. So Kenyans started having the idea of what they wanted in a form of governance that was coming. So then that led to what my friend is talking about, that created the Bomas process that came up with a very nice document, but even before the document was compiled, the government of the day started complaining and mutilated parts of it. But still, at the end of the day, when Yash Palgai handed over the document, it was a pro-people document.
One of the most participatory.
Yes, and people participated. So when the government realized that there was a document that was pro-people, it mutilated it into what was famously known as the Kilifi draft that became the Wako draft, that of course was rejected in 2005. That gave us yes. Then after the document was rejected, the Wako draft, years later the COE, the Committee of Experts, also went back and took the draft that Yash Palgai had issued, and actually lifted a lot from it. But of course, they had to do it with also the government of the day in mind. So even when we were passing the Constitution 2010 that was touted as one of the most progressive documents, it was not the best that we had on the table. But still, it was a good document.
Okay, that is the current Constitution.
That is the current Constitution. Now, the problem comes, why I was telling you all this, is that at every instance, when the government or the executive, in this case, feels like there is something good for the people, it mutilates.
They hijack the process.
They hijack the process, and they do. So we have a constitution that the government has refused to implement its spirit and the letter of the same document.
Okay.
If we could have implemented this document as is, I don't think we should be going through this. Because now we have on the document an independent judiciary, but on the ground, as they say, things are different.
Things are different. Okay, but Fred, as you continue,
yes,
even as you tout as this, and many, me included, as one of the most elaborate, expressive, eloquent, transparent constitution, do we need the BBI to amend it? Or do we need a good deal of implementation?
As we currently stand, we really need the BBI.
In what aspect of the current constitution then? Perhaps to make it even perfect?
To make it better, because as we were passing it, we were told, and we said that it wasn't 100%, remember? So we know the changes that we need to have in the document. And I think it's time so that once all these changes are incorporated and we have a document, and we also, as we amend the document that we have, we also amend the mindset of whoever is going to implement it. Because if you look at the problem that occurred in the Bomas draft, everybody was looking at the executive position in line with Kibaki and Raila. Kibaki is no more.
Okay.
You see, so if we keep making documents with people in mind, we will never get a good document.
All right. And that perhaps might explain why, at the expense of Raila Odinga, people had to forego the MAfya document, which had visioned or had the vision of a parliamentary system of governance. Victor, to you. Fred did mention the hijacking of the Bomas draft, one of the most participatory, of course, the process presided over and midwifed by constitutional expert Yash Palgai, who was called into the country after he was forced into exile by the Moi government, interestingly by President Moi. But given what's happening, and Mishuki then saying, the late Environment Minister and Internal Security, saying that don't worry about this, we only wanted Moi to leave power, no need to have such a participatory process. Now we have the MAfya again, 6 years later, MAfya, where at the expense of Mr. Odinga, many political players had to go for a pure presidential system. Today we're going back to have what we had enshrined in the MAfya document in 2010. Therefore, it's a process where we are seeing completely, I mean, at the steering wheel, members of the political establishment, resentment, incomprehension. And how do we then, even as we look forward to the BBI, course-correcting some of the imperfections of the current constitution, ring-fence the Constitution 2010, the amendments that will come out of the Uhuru and Raila Odinga handshake for purposes of posterity, not political establishment interests?
You know, there is one important bit that Fred missed in his history that would shape out and shape up this discussion. That at that time when that change was coming, surprisingly, the then president, Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, dissolved parliament.
Yeah, remember.
In 2000, November of 2000. So when he dissolved parliament, then he killed that process. So then that shaped the campaign for the 2002 elections, where now everyone was saying that we are going to give you a constitution. And remember the promise that Kibaki gave. I would give you a constitution in the first 100 days.
Which he did 8 years later.
And it took almost 6,000 days before he did that. But then, that only showed how handy the executive wanted to get and how powerful the executive should get according to the power holders of this country. And that is the hangover. The executive presidency and the autonomous president is the hangover of this regime now, where the president still thinks that he is the total man. And that is what we want to correct on to now what you are asking.
How do we then correct
now,
and what process will correct that?
On to correcting this, when we decided to go for a compromise pure presidential system, it was a compromise because there are gains that we wanted at that particular moment. And the gains that we wanted from MAfya, one was a win on devolution.
Which we attained.
Which we got. But I would tell you that if you sit down with the likes of Yash, the guys, the likes of the Rarieda MP, Dr. Otienda Molo, and the Kuro Court and Professor Piolo Lumumba, they would tell you that they did not eviction 47 counties. And that their proposal was to go back to the 8 administrative regions that we had. But then there was the thought of Majimboism coming back. And there was the thought of the sessional paper number 10 of 1965 that killed Majimboism. And they realized that the gains that they gained through sidelining other regions in this country were going to be derailed. So then we created the 47 divisions, which according to me, if you ask me, I will tell you are unnecessary, because they are too small and they are too ungovernable. And that is why you realize that we are having regional blocks. Again, in these 47 regions,
yes,
we are again talking about the Lake region, we are talking about the South Coast,
the pastoralist
block,
the coast.
If we had settled for the 8, we would not be having such kind of
But
blocks.
how then, perhaps, if we were to go by the 8, then, Victor, there's always the searing of that into the memory of many Kenyans who felt sidelined and marginalized by the session paper number 10 of 1965. How then will they have developed the process so that it can't have perhaps what appeared or a lookalike of the session paper number 10 of 1965 effects?
You know, when you go for that, then you go for what the BBI right now is talking about.
Or proposing.
Or proposing that we need to have kazi mtaani, but not kazi mtaani as it is right now. That we need to develop these regions that were underdeveloped. That we need to create a fund for them. And then strengthen devolution and increase allocation to these counties, 1. 2, strengthen and organize the independent institutions for posterity, so that we know that the IEBC forever will be independent. That the judiciary forever in this country will remain
The office of the Auditor
independent.
General.
The Auditor General will remain independent.
Okay.
And above all, the legislator should remain independent. And I will tell you why we need an independent legislature. Number 1, remember that this constitution removed the office of the official opposition leader. Now, in its removal, then the parliament itself should check the executive. But what have we seen?
With no regard for political party belonging.
Exactly.
Okay.
The parliament as it is presently constituted should only have a majority and a minority, but all geared towards checking
And accountability.
and the accountability of the executive.
Okay.
But that was killed. It was killed by the mantra that was created of tyranny of numbers.
Yes.
Okay.
So-
And the allegations of 10,000 shillings received in toilets of parliament.
That is why I'm saying this current administration has a hangover
Okay.
of an autonomous executive.
Okay, Fred, I'll come to you after the break here because I want to cite an important aspect about the amendments made by Kenyatta Senior, who is the founding president, Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, and the current Kenyatta Junior in the amendments they made to the respective constitutions at the time, with President Uhuru Kenyatta having the bulk of responsibility in the implementation of the 2010 document. And we will be back after the break here on the broadcast. Good afternoon, welcome back. We are left with about 16 minutes before we wrap things up here on the broadcast with Victor and Fred. And in our assessment of the COVID-19 billions and the search and the seeking out of accountability, the confusion, the corruption, and the corroded state institutions impacted by corruption, of course, the Ministry of Health forms a bulk of that. Fred, I was on you before I went on break, and it's very pertinent I mentioned this because after 1963, we literally shelved the then constitution because it envisioned a bicameral system of governance where the Queen of England was the head of state and the Prime Minister in Kenya, head of government. That was Kenyatta Senior, the father to the current president. And over 15 years of his leadership, he amended it 15 times. 16 times in 15 years. Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, in 24 years' time, amended the constitution 14 times. Very crucial was the one-party state after the failed coup in 1982 and the multi-party democracy in 1991. And one of the key amendments that have taken place under President Kenyatta is the amendment made to the security laws 2014 December, which was acrimoniously passed in Parliament after the fist fight. And that gives him the prerogative to appoint the Inspector General, then approved by Parliament.
Yes.
When you look at what's happening at the moment, the disjointed effort of the criminal justice system, the DSA answerable to the executive, the Inspector General not accountable for the arrest of, for instance, the 3 senators, cases of extrajudicial killings, and the pressure from the executive, aside from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Is it also one that perhaps President Uhuru Kenyatta will look back post-2022 and say, here I made a mistake?
If he has a soul, I don't know if he has, because if you see the way, first of all, talking about the security bill that was passed, you know, they were passing it for ODM, and it was meant to stop us from accessing
Anniversary towers.
Yes, because of the mandamanos that we were bringing and the changes that we wanted in IEBC. So unfortunately for the passers, it is eating them, most of them. And even some of the people who were arrested just the other day might have contributed towards the same thing. So I've always told people, and this includes the president currently, that when you make laws, you should not make laws for your enemy. That is going to hurt your enemy. Because your enemy will ascend to the position you are today, and those laws will hurt you. So we must adhere and restrain ourselves within the precincts of the law as it is. And where we want to amend, and that is why I think BBI is a good thing, it is not being made for an individual. Those proposals are not being made for an individual. If you sit and carefully read, most of those changes have an effect on the entire nation without single-handedly going for an individual. And those are the kind of laws that we need to have. But when you sit down as the executive, and what Victor was saying is true, and you think that you are still all-powerful, yay and amen, in a country where people have a progressive nation like Kenya, then you are deceiving yourself. So we must desist, and the question you've asked me is whether he'll regret it. And yes, that's one of the things he will regret.
He will look back and in admission say,
exactly. Unless he can do something within the short time that he has to right those wrongs.
Okay. Now, of course, again, opens up the debate about the use of the security laws, for instance, and terror-related charges in confining the opposition, muzzling and suppressing the opposition, which is now applicable globally since the war on terror campaign was initiated post 9/11 in the United States of America, and the successive campaigns in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and what we continue to witness in the West African part of the continent. Victor, then to you, it brings me to the aspect about the appointment and how the president has made that, because he is the first president. That's why the microscope is on him for purposes of analyzing what has happened between 2013 and now. In terms of the appointment, according to the Constitution, that the process must be of personal integrity, competence, and suitability. However, we have seen the award of political friends, and that not functioning well for the president in terms of getting the desired outcome and the results. Is it perhaps, again, a dot that is dark on President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy when he looks back at his cabinet since 2013?
You know, I would not want to blame the president entirely on his appointments, because any appointment that the president does goes through vetting in the National Assembly, where the National Assembly is perceived to be independent. And the National Assembly has been the president's conveyor belt. So if they don't qualify, then it means the two arms of government are to be blamed. Now, that said and done, Ayub, it must also not be assumed that the allies of the president are not qualified. I also want to believe that as a president, you also have qualified friends. So if we want to call them his friends, then if they're qualified, then I would want to add a tag, qualified president's friends, so that he's been appointing qualified friends. Because in his appointments, we've also seen some very qualified individuals. You see Dr. Fred Matiang'i and how he handled the Ministry for Education,
ICT,
and currently
ICT, Interior.
Then currently Interior, and he's performed exemplarily well. Now, I'm seeing the CS Peter Munya right now, and the changes he's doing at the Ministry of Agriculture, and they are encouraging and good. So apart from few elements here and there, like where I would, like the Minister for Education, where I would want to say that human is to err, and at some point you might appoint someone who is very qualified and think that is up to task, like he did with the CS of Education, Professor Kaimenya. George Magoha, the current one. And according to me, is below par. And it is surprising me because I expected him to perform exemplarily well. But then we have a CS whom, if you would ask to buy this pen of mine, he would seek consent from the president first before he buys my pen. Surely that is not someone worth.
Which is killing the self-independence guaranteed by the Constitution.
Yeah,
but even as you mentioned that, of course, we are not, punching the president for the appointments he makes. But definitely it has to adhere to the Constitution. And his cabinet since 2013 never met the gender threshold.
I think it is only on gender threshold and maybe the appointment of Rashid Echesa that have contravened the Constitution. But then on all other parameters, all these guys have always qualified. except that they refuse to do the job
Ayub,
that they were brought to
I
do.
do not think that we are interrogating whether the president's appointees are qualified or not. We are interrogating the manner in which some of these things are done. Of course, we have laws and regulations that regulate how appointments should be done. And if they are adhered to, then whether you bring a pig but you have followed the law, then it's for the people to suffer who gave you the laws to follow. Because the law requires that a recommendation and then the vetting. And that's where we go back to what you were saying, that we need a legislature that is pro-people.
Exactly. And independent.
And independent. That just because the president has nominated so-and-so, we must not endorse that person. We sit down, we interrogate the person, and we tell the president, this one is not qualified for this job. Get us another appointee. So that we don't go back to a situation where the president can wake up and while driving to Gatondo, meets an old friend and says, you are the CS of education. You know, those kind of things.
Roadside appointments like President Moi.
Yes, and firing people at will. So whether those people are qualified or not, the due process of getting them into that office must be followed.
And of course, the failure, and since some of the cabinet secretaries have overseen during the 10 years, mega multi-billion scandals, Henry Rotich, Aror Kimore Dams, Anwai Guru, NYS, Energy, you have the minister before, CS Kater now, and then you also have the scandal of the Kenya Power Lighting Company, which is still the Ministry of Energy. Wario, Sports, Echesa then came and bolted
How do you
out
actually put Echesa for I mean,
all that, including the Office of the Presidency, that the Auditor General says cannot account for 2.5 billion Kenya shillings meant for tree planting exercise, another 2 billion spent unnecessarily on foreign trips when you have heads of state like President Magufuli, who hasn't traveled out of his country except once for the AU headquarters in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, and saving the country around $400 million US, about 4 billion Kenya shillings. It again rests on the shoulders of the president, isn't that some of these issues need some lessons from the top, which he has categorically failed in many aspects.
You know, I agree with the former Auditor General on very many things, except for the fact that he blamed the president for his foreign trips. Because how this country will be seen in future is how it is positioned out here. We have to create allies. And creating allies, when I was in school, I was taught that face-to-face meetings are very effective. And it has also taken some few presidents traveling into this country, including the first sitting president of the United States of America coming into this country. We've seen the Prime Minister of Israel coming into this country.
Narendra Modi,
coming here.
Theresa May, UK.
So we can't blame the president for only traveling out. We've also had some serious dignitaries jetting into this country, which is encouraging and putting this country into a very good position. So I would want to fault him on that for telling us that the president is traveling a lot. If be it is that he is traveling for the good of this country, so be it. Let him get good connections for us as a country and put us at a very good place in the global map. So that is encouraging. Just a minute, Fred. If these foreign trips are consuming a lot than they should consume, then we should take issue with that. But not that the president is traveling.
That has been the issue, Victor, that you need to travel. Because for foreign diplomacy, heads of states must travel to other countries. But in our scenario, if you look at those reports, you'll find that the entourage that is accompanying the president, for example, to the US, is bloated. We have like 30 people who are basically going to do nothing. So if the foreign trips, as necessary as they are, and that's why we're saying everything in this country always has a leeway for making an extra cash for people. So traveling by the president is not bad, but the bloating of the people who go with him. You'll find that somebody, is it 2014, when a list of about 100 and something people accompanied the president, but in actual sense, they were not 100 and something. But that was the list that was floated. So those are the kind of malfeasance that we don't want to see. You travel all you want, give us the connections, but travel within a budget.
Okay, final comments, starting with you, Victor. 10 years on, where do you think this will end up? And do you think that even as we build up to an amendment from the perspective of the Building Bridges Initiative, the BBI, how do we then perhaps confine and ring-fence this from the influence of politicians, as we had lost the MAfya document in 2010 and Bomas in 2004?
Now, I laud the new constitution for having brought devolution, because devolution has largely opened up this country. Now, the independence of the said institutions that we have has been a very, very good trend to this country. But then there are few changes that we need to make. And I believe that as a country, we need more allocation to these counties. We need to weed out corruption and a few other things. So then I agree with the BBI document that let's strengthen devolution, let's fight corruption as it should be, and let's strengthen the independent constitutional bodies as they should be. And at the same time, let's implement the constitution as it should be, and let's be obeyers of the rule of law.
Yes, Fred.
Yeah, I think the constitution that we have should be implemented, bearing in mind what Kenyans wanted it to do to them, without necessarily mutilating it to fit the current executive's need. And that's the problem. And even as we do the amendments, like I said previously, we should not look at these amendments with 2 individuals or 3 or 4 in mind. We should look at the institutions that we want to bring change into, so that we have robust institutions, we have a robust devolution, so that Kenyans can benefit from their katiba. If we keep changing katibas or look at katibas from the aspect of individuals, then we are losing it.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. Let's have the analysis of the international update starting in the United States of America, where, as you can see on your screens, Republicans have kicked off first night of scaled-down national convention. Family allies have rallied for Donald Trump as Republican convention opens in North Carolina. The choice is what analysts are saying is perhaps to gain political ground. The first day of the Republican convention has featured warnings of a lost America and high praise for Trump, who, according to them, will restore normalcy and will make America great again. One of the key people who spoke during the convention is the former American ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, who is from an immigrant mother, and said that Trump had restored American dignity in the negotiation for American power. No soft power, she said, was under the Obama administration, and she adding that the sanctions were also piled more on the North Korean administration and equally on Iran. She cited the 2015 Paris Climate Accord, the 2015 Iran nuclear agreement, and the other sectors. She said Trump has restored American dignity. And this as Trump had accepted his nomination as the Republican convention started. Outrage, though, as Mike Pompeo's Jerusalem speech to the Republican National Convention breaks years of norms and the concerns that the Arabs and the Palestinians have expressed in the American renegotiation and being the mediator in the coming together of the United Arab Emirates and Israel. What many Israelis are also calling will be annexation of more land belonging to Palestine, the shelving of that ambition by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, or if you may like him, Bibi, and how he says that this will help restore some normalcy. Politically for him, though, it will be a gain for Donald Trump, who mediated, also banking on that support from American Israelis and the support they have in terms of the finances of the campaign and holding him high ahead of the elections in November 2020. Coming to the other breaking news, Pakistan wins rare fragile success against the novel coronavirus. The South Asian nation of 200 million seems to have won the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, but fear of a second wave remains. This as the Imran Khan government in Islamabad appeared to have struggled in coping with the pace of the pandemic from the onset, and one of the most affected countries where social distancing has been a problem owing to the economic outlook of the nuclear country in Pakistan. This as America's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, warns of risk in rushing coronavirus vaccine, and the United Nations says global tourism has lost 320 billion amid coronavirus pandemic. And this as the coronavirus catches up with Usain Bolt in the world fastest man on the planet. Coming to the other important aspects, there are also developments in Europe, and that is the Belarusian elections, the coronavirus pandemic, American elections, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Beirut explosions, where the government is putting the pieces together afterwards, a fortnight of the blast that had caused many homeless after the port blast, despite thousands losing their homes. A strong community spirits out and has left many who are feeling the impact of the blast that happened in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. And coming to the coronavirus pandemic map as covered by the CNN Health, America remains a concern for the World Health Organization, so as many Latin American countries, the biggest for that matter in Latin America, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Peru, and in Asia, Hong Kong is a concern as cases continue to renew. In Africa, South Africa has lifted the lockdown. It's now partially coming back to normalcy after President Ramaphosa did open up the country. In Europe, Spain is a concern, but many European countries, the cloud of COVID-19 is going away. In Russia, where the President Vladimir Putin did say they discovered the vaccine, appears to be also a normal one. In Australia and in India, in Bangladesh, in Colombia, and in Pakistan, there are no much concerns by the World Health Organization. Africa, in Kenya, the government says that the flattening of the curve will be attained in 2 weeks' time. In Nigeria, there is a small concern by the World Health Organization, but given what's happening at the moment, the world seems to have recorded 23,657,550 cases of the pandemic. Of that, 813,257 people have died, and these are the cases as captured by the CNN Health website. Thank you so much for joining us here on the broadcast, and thank you to Fred Asira and Victor Marende, who are my panel this Tuesday morning in the analysis of 10 years after the Constitution, and given what has happened ever since 2013 when President Uhuru Kenyatta became the first president to be elected under the new constitutional dispensation 7 years later, taking account of what has happened in the journey towards the attainment of the implementation of the document Kenyans voted for by 68% and promulgated on the 27th of August 2010. We also had talked about the impact of the scandal at KEMSA and at the Ministry of Health that's likely going to be having an impact on the COVID-19 pandemic fight, and the government continuing to race against time to slow the fast-spreading virus. Kenyans concerned about the economy and why some state officials have gotten fat in terms of the richness of the pandemic's cash from the EU, the European Union, the African Development Bank, the IMF and the World Bank that ought to be channeled to healthcare centers, and the government budgeting for that in the maximization in the fight against the pandemic. The number has been 0791478990, the hashtag on Twitter, New Day KE, the short SMS code 40920. Our coverage of Katiba 10 continues tomorrow here on the broadcast. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.